People like him are replaceable. The words landed harder than the sound of the shattered glass echoing across the restaurant floor. At 2:13 a.m., Carter and Oaks still glowed like a jewel in downtown Chicago, its golden lights reflecting against the rain outside, while wealthy customers laughed over $100 steaks and vintage Napa Valley wine. But behind the polished dining room, beyond the velvet curtains and marble bar, the kitchen felt like another world entirely. Hot, loud, exhausted. A middle-aged busboy stood frozen beside a tray of broken champagne flutes, his hands trembling as the restaurant manager towered over him with visible disgust. "Do you even realize how much those glasses cost?" Richard snapped sharply, straightening his expensive navy suit, while several servers awkwardly avoided eye contact. "I'm sorry," the older man whispered. "It slipped." "Yeah? Well, maybe your hands are too old for this job." A few uncomfortable chuckles spread through the kitchen. One young server smirked under his breath. People like him are replaceable. In the far corner of the kitchen, another busboy slowly tightened his grip around a wet kitchen towel. His jaw flexed once beneath the shadow of a faded baseball cap. Nobody noticed him. Nobody ever noticed busboys, especially one wearing cheap sneakers, wireframe glasses, and a wrinkled gray uniform with the name Ethan stitched over the pocket. Which was ironic, because Ethan Carter owned the entire restaurant. In fact, he owned 23 more across the country. 3 months ago, Forbes had called him one of the youngest hospitality billionaires in America. Tonight, one of his own managers had ordered him to scrub grease traps and clean bathroom floors. Ethan lowered his eyes again and kept wiping the stainless steel counter in silence. That had been the point of this whole experiment. Disappear. Watch. Listen. Find out who people really were when money wasn't in the room. And lately, what he discovered had only confirmed the ugly suspicion growing inside him for years. Respect followed power. Kindness followed status. And loyalty disappeared the second those things vanished. "Ethan," Richard barked, suddenly without even looking at him. "Bathroom too." Somebody clogged the sink again. Ethan nodded once. "Sure." No anger. No hesitation. Just calm exhaustion. He grabbed a pair of rubber gloves and turned toward the hallway when a soft voice stopped him. "Wait." He glanced back. A waitress stood near the prep station holding 2 paper coffee cups. Olivia Hayes, 27, night shift, new hire. She wore worn black sneakers with a tiny tear near the sole, and her blonde hair was tied into a messy bun that had almost fallen apart hours ago. She looked just as exhausted as everyone else. Maybe more. But unlike everyone else in the kitchen, she wasn't pretending not to see him. "You forgot this earlier," she said gently, holding out one of the coffees. Ethan frowned slightly. "I didn't order anything." "I know." A faint smile touched her lips. "You just looked like you needed it." Ethan stared at the cup for a second longer than he should have. It was small. Cheap diner coffee in a paper cup with a crooked black lid. But somehow it felt heavier than the expensive whiskey waiting untouched in his penthouse downtown. "Thanks," he said quietly. Olivia shrugged like it was nothing. "Long night, huh?" Ethan almost answered automatically. Almost gave her the same polite lie he gave everyone else. "Fine. Busy. Surviving." But before he could speak, Richard's voice exploded again from the kitchen. "Olivia, table 12 is waiting." "Coming," she called back quickly before looking at Ethan one last time. "Don't let this place make you miserable, okay?" Then she disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors, carrying empty plates back toward the glittering dining room, while Ethan stood completely still beside the hallway. The coffee warmed his hands through the paper cup, and for the first time in months, the billionaire who owned everything suddenly couldn't stop thinking about a waitress who had treated him like he mattered. The rain had finally stopped by the time Carter and Oak closed for the night, but the city streets outside still shimmered beneath the yellow glow of streetlights and passing taxis. Inside the restaurant, the last few employees dragged themselves through cleanup with tired eyes and sore feet, while jazz music played softly through the nearly empty dining room. Ethan stood alone near the industrial sink in the back kitchen, rolling up his sleeves as warm water rushed over stacks of dirty plates. The expensive watch he normally wore sat locked away in a drawer upstairs with the rest of his real life. Down here, nobody cared who he was. Down here, he was just another tired worker trying to survive the shift. "You missed a spot." Ethan glanced sideways as Olivia walked past carrying a tray of silverware. There was teasing in her voice now. Familiarity. He looked down at the plate in his hand. I own 3 different dish soaps at home, and somehow I am still bad at this. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Olivia laughed softly. A real laugh. Not the fake customer service version she wore in the dining room. 3 dish soaps? She asked. What kind of person owns 3 dish soaps? Ethan caught himself too late. A paranoid one. That sounds suspiciously specific. Maybe I just hate grease. You are weird, Ethan. He smiled faintly despite himself. Weird. Nobody had called him weird in years. Ruthless? Brilliant? Intimidating? Sure. But weird sounded strangely human. Olivia set the tray down and leaned against the counter for a second, stretching her sore shoulder. Ethan noticed the exhaustion in the movement immediately. She was trying to hide how badly her body hurt. You okay? He asked quietly. I will be. That does not sound convincing. She exhaled through her nose with a tired smile. Double shifts. Rent. Hospital bills. You know, the American dream. Ethan looked at her more carefully then. Her mascara had faded slightly beneath her eyes. Her hands were dry from sanitizer and hot water. One of her shoelaces had snapped and been tied together in a knot. Small things. Things nobody else noticed because nobody else bothered to look. Your mom? He asked gently. Olivia nodded once. Congestive heart failure. The words came out calm, practiced, like she had repeated them too many times already. Insurance covers some of it. Not enough. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the sink. Strange how? Quickly money changed meaning depending on where you stood. Upstairs in his penthouse, people spent $10,000 on wine without blinking. Down here, a woman was destroying herself over hospital bills. I am sorry, he said quietly. Olivia shrugged again, but this time the smile disappeared. She used to work 2 jobs when I was a kid, she said softly. Now it is my turn. Ethan did not know why that sentence hit him so hard. Maybe because it reminded him of his mother working late shifts at a roadside diner outside Milwaukee before he built Carter and Oak into a billion-dollar empire. Or maybe because Olivia said it without bitterness. No self-pity, no performance, just truth. A loud crash suddenly echoed from the hallway near the storage room. Richard's voice followed instantly. Seriously? Who left these boxes here? Ethan and Olivia both looked up as a young dishwasher hurried forward, apologizing nervously. Richard rubbed his forehead dramatically. Unbelievable. I am surrounded by incompetence. Olivia muttered under her breath. You say that like your personality is winning awards. Ethan choked on a laugh before he could stop himself. Olivia looked surprised for half a second, then grinned. And for one strange moment, standing beside a sink at nearly 3 in the morning with soap on his hands and exhaustion in his bones, Ethan Carter forgot he was supposed to be undercover. He forgot about board meetings and scandals and investors waiting for him uptown. Because the waitress beside him was treating him like something far more valuable than a billionaire. She was treating him like a person. By the time Ethan stepped outside the restaurant, the city had gone quiet in that strange way Chicago sometimes did before dawn. The streets were nearly empty except for the distant rumble of trains and the occasional cab sliding through wet intersections. Cold wind rolled between the buildings as he adjusted the worn gray hoodie beneath his jacket and started walking toward the employee parking lot. He could have called his driver. He could have been home in 12 minutes, standing beneath heated marble floors with a $20 million skyline view, waiting outside his penthouse windows. Instead, he found himself thinking about a waitress with tired eyes and broken shoelaces. You are weird, Ethan. The faint smile returned before he realized it. Then he stopped walking. Across the alley behind the restaurant, near a flickering street lamp, Olivia stood beside the back delivery entrance holding 2 large paper bags. Ethan frowned slightly. The restaurant had closed 20 minutes ago. What was she still doing here? He stayed in the shadows without meaning to, watching as a homeless man slowly approached from the corner, pushing an old shopping cart filled with blankets and crushed soda cans. Olivia smiled warmly the second she saw him. Hey, Mr. Green. Evening, sweetheart. She handed him one of the bags. Turkey sandwich, chicken soup, and I snuck in pie tonight. The old man's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. Pie. Do not tell anybody. I have a criminal reputation to protect. He laughed softly before his expression gentled. Your mama doing okay? Olivia hesitated only half a second. Some days are better than others. And you? Mr. Green asked quietly. You sleeping enough? Olivia looked down briefly. That obvious, huh? Ethan stayed completely still as the conversation settled heavily in his chest. She was exhausted, barely surviving financially, working double shifts. And somehow she was still feeding people after midnight with leftover food she could have taken home herself. Most people performed kindness when somebody important was watching. Olivia did it in an empty alley behind a restaurant at almost 3:30 in the morning. Mr. Green carefully tucked the food bag into his cart. Your mom raised you right. Olivia's smile softened instantly. Yeah, she whispered. She really did. The old man slowly disappeared down the sidewalk while Olivia leaned against the brick wall for a moment, rubbing her eyes with tired fingers. Ethan should have left. Instead, his feet moved before his brain caught up. Gravel crunched softly beneath his shoes as he stepped out of the shadows. Olivia looked startled at first. Oh, you scared me. Sorry, Ethan said quietly. I did not mean to. She laughed weakly. You are really good at appearing out of nowhere. His eyes drifted toward the empty alley. You do that every night? Sometimes. Why? Olivia looked genuinely confused by the question. Because they are hungry. Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. The answer had come so naturally to her. No speech. No self-congratulation. Just simple human decency. She studied his face for a second beneath the weak yellow light. You have not eaten either, have you? Ethan blinked. I am fine. That is not what I asked. Before he could respond, Olivia reached into the second paper bag and held out a wrapped sandwich. Take it. Olivia, seriously. You look like you are running on coffee and regret. Ethan stared at her quietly before taking the sandwich from her hand. Their fingers brushed for only a second, but somehow the tiny contact felt strangely intimate. Warm. Real. Olivia shoved her hands into the pockets of her jacket as cold wind swept through the alley again. You know what your problem is? She asked softly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I have several. You might need to narrow it down. She smiled faintly. You carry everything like the world is sitting on your shoulders. Ethan looked away instinctively. If only she knew. Billions of dollars. Lawsuits. Investors. Headlines. Betrayal. Loneliness so deep it echoed inside empty rooms. And yet somehow the woman standing in front of him saw through all of it without knowing a single thing about his real name. Olivia tilted her head slightly, studying him with quiet concern. Then she said the three words that made Ethan freeze completely beneath the cold Chicago night. You look tired. Ethan forgot how to breathe for a second. The cold wind moving through the alley disappeared. The distant sound of traffic faded. Even the city itself seemed to go silent around him as Olivia's words echoed somewhere deep inside a part of him he had spent years trying to lock away. You look tired. 17 years earlier, his mother had whispered those exact words while standing in the kitchen of their tiny apartment outside Milwaukee. He had been 19 then, exhausted from college classes and overnight shifts washing dishes at a roadside diner. His mother had touched his cheek gently and smiled through her own sickness. You look tired, Ethan. 3 weeks later, she was gone. Nobody had said those words to him since. Not investors. Not business partners. Not the woman who almost married him. People usually looked at Ethan Carter and saw confidence, money, power. They saw magazine covers and interviews and expensive suits. Nobody looked close enough to notice the exhaustion underneath. But somehow Olivia had. You okay? Her voice pulled him back into the alley. Ethan blinked quickly and looked away before she could see too much in his expression. Yeah, he answered quietly. Just tired, I guess. Olivia gave him a small sympathetic smile like she understood more than he had actually said. Then eat the sandwich before you pass out dramatically in the parking lot and ruin my night. Ethan let out a quiet laugh despite himself. That sounds oddly specific. I had a line cook faint beside the fryer last month. That seems unsafe. It absolutely was. Another cold gust swept through the alley, lifting loose strands of blonde hair around her face. Olivia rubbed her arms slightly beneath her thin jacket. Ethan noticed immediately. Where is your car? He asked. 3 blocks away. At this hour? She shrugged. Parking is cheaper. Of course it was. Ethan stared at her for a second before quietly taking off his hoodie beneath the jacket and holding it toward her. Olivia frowned instantly. Absolutely not. Take it. Ethan, it is 38 degrees outside. And your jacket is basically decorative. Wow. Rude. Accurate. She shook her head, smiling faintly. Then what are you going to wear? Ethan glanced down at the thin black long-sleeve shirt underneath. I will survive. Olivia hesitated before finally taking the hoodie from his hands. The second she slipped it on, the oversized fabric swallowed her completely. It smelled faintly like soap, coffee, and something warm she could not explain. Thank you, she said softly. Ethan nodded once, suddenly unable to look directly at her for too long. This was dangerous. Not because she might discover who he really was. Somehow that almost felt inevitable now. No, the dangerous part was how easy it felt standing here with her. Like the version of himself she saw in this alley mattered more than the billionaire everyone else knew. Olivia adjusted the sleeves over her hands before glancing toward him curiously. Can I ask you something? Depends how terrifying the question is. Why did you take this job? Ethan's chest tightened immediately. What do you mean? You do not act like somebody who belongs here. The words landed harder than she intended. Olivia quickly shook her head. I did not mean that in a bad way. No, Ethan said quietly. You are right. She studied him carefully beneath the street lamp. So what happened? Ethan almost laughed at the simplicity of the question. What happened? Betrayal happened. Success happened. Loneliness happened. Years of building an empire so massive it slowly erased the human being inside it happened. But Olivia was still waiting patiently for an answer. Ethan looked down at the sandwich still in his hand. I think, he said slowly, some people work so much they forget who they are when everything gets quiet. Olivia's expression softened immediately. Yeah, she whispered. I know that feeling. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city hummed quietly around them while exhaustion and loneliness stood between them, like invisible ghosts, both pretending not to notice. Then Olivia's phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket. She checked the screen, and her face immediately fell. Ethan noticed the change instantly. What is wrong? Olivia swallowed hard before answering softly. It is the hospital. The warmth disappeared from Olivia's face almost instantly as she stared at the phone screen glowing in her hand. Ethan could practically see the exhaustion returning to her shoulders all over again. Is your mom okay? He asked quietly. Olivia swallowed before answering. The nurse said her blood pressure dropped again. Her voice stayed calm, but barely. They want me there before morning rounds. Ethan nodded slowly. Then I will drive you. Olivia blinked. What? You heard me. Ethan, you do not have to. It is almost 4 in the morning, and you parked 3 blocks away. He held her gaze evenly. I am not letting you take the train alone. Olivia hesitated. Ethan could see the instinctive resistance there. People who struggled alone for too long always had trouble accepting help. Finally, she sighed softly. Fine, but only if you stop sounding like somebody's tired dad. Ethan smirked faintly. That was one time. You literally said, I am not letting you take the train alone. It was responsible. It was aggressively responsible. For the first time since the hospital called, Olivia laughed quietly again, and Ethan felt something inside his chest loosen in response. 20 minutes later, his old pickup truck pulled into the nearly empty hospital parking garage downtown. The truck itself was part of the disguise. Rust near the bumper. Faded paint. Nothing that looked remotely connected to a billionaire whose real car collection regularly appeared in magazines. Olivia stared at the building ahead while nervously twisting the sleeve of Ethan's hoodie between her fingers. I hate hospitals, she admitted softly. Ethan turned off the engine. Bad memories? No, she looked down. Just too many memories. Neither of them moved right away. Outside the windshield, pale morning light was beginning to creep over the sleeping city skyline. Nurses carrying coffee hurried through the entrance doors while ambulances sat quietly near the curb beneath white fluorescent lights. Ethan glanced toward Olivia again. You do not have to do this alone. The words slipped out naturally. Honest. Olivia looked at him carefully then, like she was trying to understand who he really was beneath the exhaustion and quiet eyes. You know, she said softly, most people disappear the second things get inconvenient. Ethan looked away briefly toward the steering wheel. If she only knew how many people had disappeared from his life the second scandals hit the news 3 months ago. Investors stopped calling. Friends stopped inviting him places. Even his fiancée had walked away with rehearsed sympathy in her voice, and someone else waiting outside in a black Mercedes. Yeah, he answered quietly. I know. Olivia studied him for another second before opening the truck door. Come on. Ethan frowned slightly. What? You drove me here. She stepped out into the cold garage air. The least I can do is buy you terrible hospital coffee. Ethan followed her through the sliding glass doors into the brightly lit lobby where the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee hung in the air. Olivia led him toward a small waiting area near the cardiac wing before stopping outside room 814. Through the partially open door, Ethan caught a glimpse of an older woman sleeping peacefully beneath thin hospital blankets, gray beginning to touch her blonde hair despite still looking far too young to seem fragile. Olivia's expression softened instantly. "That is my mom," she whispered. Ethan noticed the tenderness in her voice immediately. The protectiveness, the fear hidden beneath it. "She looks strong," he said quietly. Olivia smiled sadly. "She pretends to be." A nurse suddenly approached from down the hallway holding a clipboard. "Olivia." Olivia turned quickly. "Yes. Your mother is awake asking for you." Olivia nodded immediately before glancing back toward Ethan. "You do not have to stay." Ethan looked toward room 814 again, toward the woman who raised the waitress who fed homeless strangers in dark alleys and noticed exhaustion in people nobody else looked at twice. Then he met Olivia's eyes again. "I think," he said softly, "I would like to." The hospital room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of machines and the distant squeak of nurses' shoes moving through the hallway outside. Morning sunlight had just started slipping through the blinds when Olivia stepped carefully into room 814 with Ethan following a few steps behind her. "Mom," she whispered gently. The woman in the bed slowly opened her eyes. Even exhausted and pale beneath the white blankets, there was warmth in her face immediately when she saw her daughter. "There she is," she murmured softly. Olivia moved beside the bed at once, brushing a strand of hair away from her mother's forehead. "You scared me tonight." "Sorry, sweetheart." Her mother noticed Ethan standing near the door and blinked curiously. "Oh," she said, with a faint smile. "And who is this?" Olivia glanced back quickly, suddenly looking strangely nervous. "This is Ethan. We work together." Ethan stepped forward politely. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." "Linda Hayes," she answered warmly. "Thank you for bringing my daughter here at 4 in the morning instead of letting her wander Chicago alone." Olivia sighed dramatically. "See? Even my mother thinks I make bad decisions." Linda smiled weakly. "That is because you got your stubbornness from me." Ethan laughed quietly, and something about the sound seemed to surprise all three of them. It had been a long time since laughter felt natural to him. Olivia pulled a chair closer to the bed while Ethan stayed near the window, watching the morning slowly brighten the city outside. He should have left hours ago. His assistant had probably already called twice. Board members were waiting for financial reports. Investors expected him at a 9 o'clock conference meeting downtown. But somehow none of it felt as urgent as this tiny hospital room where a waitress sat holding her mother's hand like the rest of the world did not matter. "Olivia tells me you work at the restaurant overnight too," Linda said softly. Ethan looked back toward her. "Yes, ma'am." "Then you must be exhausted." Olivia immediately pointed toward her mother. "See? I told you." Ethan smiled faintly, but Linda continued studying him carefully with the kind of quiet wisdom only mothers seem to have. "You have sad eyes," she said gently. Ethan froze for half a second. Olivia looked embarrassed instantly. "Mom." "What?" Linda asked innocently. "I am old, not blind." Ethan lowered his gaze briefly, strangely unable to answer. Because the terrifying thing was, she was right. Linda gave him a small sympathetic smile. "People carry loneliness differently," she said softly. "Some carry it loudly. Some carry it quietly." The room fell silent after that. Ethan stared out the window again, but her words followed him anyway. Quiet loneliness. That was exactly what it had become. Not dramatic, not visible, just endless empty rooms, polite conversations, and the feeling that nobody actually saw him anymore. Olivia stood, slowly from beside the bed. "I am going to grab coffee before I collapse." She pointed toward Ethan. "Do not let her bully you while I am gone." "No promises," Linda whispered with a mischievous smile. The second Olivia disappeared into the hallway, silence settled gently between them again. Linda watched Ethan for another moment before speaking quietly. "My daughter likes you." Ethan blinked immediately. "I do not think that is true. Mothers know things." Ethan smiled awkwardly. "We barely know each other." Sometimes tired people recognize each other faster than everyone else. Ethan did not know how to respond to that. Linda adjusted slightly against the pillows before continuing softly. Olivia spends so much time taking care of everyone else that she forgets herself. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway where her daughter had disappeared. I worry about what happens to her after I am gone. Ethan felt something tighten painfully in his chest. Do not say that. Linda looked back toward him with gentle understanding. Life says it eventually whether we want it to or not. Then, after a small pause, she added quietly, but meeting good people helps make the fear smaller. Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly unable to ignore the strange protective feeling growing inside him anymore. Because somewhere between the restaurant kitchen, the cold alley, and this tiny hospital room, Olivia Hayes had started mattering to him far more than she should have. By the time Ethan finally left the hospital, the city was fully awake around him. Morning traffic crawled through downtown Chicago while businessmen rushed between office towers balancing coffee cups and expensive briefcases. Normally, this was the world Ethan Carter controlled effortlessly. Meetings, numbers, decisions worth millions made before noon. But sitting behind the wheel of his old pickup truck outside St. Mary's Hospital, none of it felt important anymore. His phone vibrated again across the passenger seat. Claire. Fourth missed call. Ethan finally answered with a tired sigh. Please tell me somebody is actively on fire, he muttered. Only the board. Claire replied dryly through the speaker. You missed. The investor briefing. Ethan rubbed his eyes. Reschedule it. Silence. Ethan, she said more carefully now, what is going on with you lately? He glanced back toward the hospital entrance where Olivia had disappeared 20 minutes earlier. I am handling something. Does this something have a name? Ethan almost smiled despite himself. Claire had worked beside him for 8 years. She noticed everything. I have to go. Ethan. He ended the call before she could continue. 40 minutes later, he walked back into Carter and Oak through the employee entrance just as the lunch shift was beginning. The kitchen buzzed with energy again. Knives against cutting boards. Servers rushing through prep lists. Music playing too loudly from someone's phone speaker. Richard immediately stormed toward him the second he spotted him. Nice of you to show up, he snapped. Some of us actually work for a living. Ethan lowered his eyes calmly. Sorry. Sorry does not cover disappearing during cleanup. Richard shoved a printed schedule into Ethan's chest. You are on trash duty all week. Got it. And stop talking to Olivia during shifts. Ethan looked up slowly at that. Richard smirked slightly, clearly enjoying himself. She is here to work, not babysit lonely busboys. Before Ethan could answer, the kitchen doors pushed open and Olivia hurried inside carrying her apron and backpack. The second she saw Ethan standing there, relief flashed across her face so quickly she could not hide it. Hey, she said softly. Hey. Richard rolled his eyes dramatically and walked away muttering something under his breath about incompetence. Olivia ignored him completely. I looked for you this morning. I had to leave. I figured. She studied him carefully for a second. Did you sleep at all? Ethan gave her a look. Olivia sighed knowingly. That bad, huh? Before Ethan could answer, one of the line cooks suddenly called Olivia over for help with a catering order. Coming, she shouted back before lowering her voice toward Ethan again. Wait here. That sounds suspiciously threatening. Trust me. She disappeared into the kitchen for several minutes before returning, carrying a paper bag and setting it quietly beside him near the supply shelves. Ethan frowned slightly. What is this? Lunch. Olivia, you skipped dinner. And breakfast. She crossed her arms stubbornly. I noticed things. Ethan stared at the bag silently for a second before opening it. Inside sat a turkey sandwich, apple slices, and a handwritten sticky note folded carefully on top. He unfolded it slowly. The world is mean enough already. Eat something. Olivia. Ethan looked up toward her immediately. She suddenly looked embarrassed. I know it is cheesy. No, he said quietly. It is not. Their eyes held for a second too long before footsteps interrupted them. A sharply dressed man in an expensive charcoal suit entered through the back office doors carrying an iPad beneath his arm. Ethan recognized him instantly. Daniel Mercer, one of Carter Hospitality's senior regional executives. Daniel stopped cold the second he saw Ethan standing beside the storage shelves wearing a gray busboy uniform. Shock flashed across his face before he quickly covered it. Olivia noticed immediately. You know each other? She asked curiously. Ethan answered too fast. No, but Daniel was still staring at him with visible panic now. Because unlike everyone else in the restaurant, Daniel Mercer knew exactly who the busboy really was. Daniel Mercer recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Ethan saw the flash of panic in his eyes before the executive forced a polished corporate smile onto his face. "Sorry," Daniel said smoothly, adjusting the cuff of his expensive suit. "Thought you were somebody else." Ethan held his gaze evenly. "Happens a lot." Olivia looked between them curiously while Daniel's attention shifted toward the sticky note still sitting beside Ethan's lunch bag. Something unreadable crossed his expression for half a second before he turned toward the kitchen. "Richard," he called sharply. "Office. Now." Richard immediately hurried after him like an obedient dog chasing approval. The second the office door closed behind them, Olivia frowned slightly. That was weird. Ethan grabbed the paper bag calmly. "Corporate people are always weird. You say that like you have studied them in the wild." "Maybe I have." Olivia narrowed her eyes playfully. "You know, for somebody mysterious, you are actually terrible at lying." Ethan almost smiled, but his attention drifted toward the office hallway instead. Daniel should not have been there today. Regional executives rarely visited locations without warning unless something bigger was happening behind the scenes. And if Daniel recognized him publicly before Ethan was ready, the entire undercover operation could collapse overnight. 20 minutes later, lunch rush exploded through the restaurant. The dining room filled with expensive coats, business meetings, and the constant clinking of silverware against polished plates. Ethan moved quietly between tables clearing dishes while Olivia rushed through the chaos balancing trays and drink orders with practiced speed despite obvious exhaustion. But something felt different now. Richard kept watching Olivia more closely than usual. Shorter patience. Sharper tone. Twice Ethan caught him criticizing her over things that barely mattered. "Table 6 has been waiting 2 minutes. Your apron looks wrinkled. Smile more when greeting guests." Olivia stayed calm through all of it, but Ethan could see the strain slowly building behind her eyes. Then everything went wrong at once. A famous food critic named Vanessa Cole unexpectedly entered the restaurant just after 1 o'clock surrounded by 2 assistants and a photographer. The entire atmosphere shifted immediately. Staff straightened posture. Richard practically sprinted across the dining room with fake charm dripping from every word. "Ms. Cole, what an honor." Ethan watched quietly from near the kitchen doors as Vanessa took her seat near the center window table. This was exactly the kind of surprise visit that could make or destroy a restaurant reputation overnight. Richard turned toward the staff sharply. "Nobody screws this up." The pressure spread instantly through the room like static electricity. Olivia grabbed a tray of drinks while trying to manage 4 tables at once. Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. "Slow down," he said quietly as she passed him. "I am trying," she whispered back. Then disaster struck. One of the new servers collided with Olivia near the service station. A glass of red wine spilled across the edge of Vanessa Cole's white designer jacket. Silence crashed across the dining room. The young server froze in horror. Olivia immediately stepped forward. "I am so sorry." But before anybody else could speak, Richard stormed forward furiously. "Unbelievable." He turned directly toward Vanessa with exaggerated apology. "I deeply apologize, Miss Cole. This waitress clearly cannot handle pressure." Ethan's jaw tightened instantly. Because Olivia had not caused the accident at all. The young server looked terrified beside her, but stayed silent. Richard lowered his voice toward Olivia coldly. "Clean out your locker after shift." Olivia blinked. "What?" "You heard me." "Richard," Ethan said sharply before he could stop himself. Richard spun around instantly. "Stay out of this." The entire dining room had gone quiet now. Customers watching. Staff frozen. Olivia stood there humiliated beside the shattered wine glass, while Richard continued speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This restaurant cannot afford careless employees." Ethan looked toward Olivia, toward the exhaustion in her eyes, toward the woman who fed strangers, cared for her sick mother, and somehow still found kindness for everyone around her. Then he looked back at Richard. Something inside him finally snapped into place with terrifying clarity. Slowly, Ethan reached up toward the faded baseball cap on his head. And for the first time since walking into Carter and Oak disguised as a busboy, Ethan Carter decided he was done pretending. The entire restaurant seemed to stop breathing as Ethan slowly removed the faded baseball cap from his head. One movement. That was all it took. The tired busboy standing near the shattered wine glass disappeared instantly, replaced by a man several people in the dining room recognized immediately from magazine covers, business interviews, and the giant black and white portrait hanging in the corporate office upstairs. Ethan Carter lifted his eyes calmly toward Richard. "You are firing the wrong person." Silence crashed across the restaurant. One server nearly dropped a tray. Vanessa Cole lowered her wine glass slowly, staring in disbelief. Daniel Mercer looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. And Olivia. Olivia just stood frozen beside the service station, her face completely pale. Richard blinked rapidly. "And Mr. Carter, do not." Ethan's voice stayed quiet, but it carried through the room effortlessly. "Do not pretend you suddenly respect people after spending months humiliating them." Richard's face drained of color instantly. Ethan stepped forward slowly now, every movement controlled. Olivia Hayes did not spill that wine. His eyes shifted briefly toward the terrified young server beside her. He did. The young man looked seconds away from passing out. Ethan continued calmly. "And unlike you." She stepped forward to protect someone else from embarrassment. Vanessa Cole crossed her arms thoughtfully. "Interesting," she murmured quietly. Ethan finally turned toward her respectfully. "Ms. Cole, your jacket will be professionally replaced within 24 hours. Vanessa smiled faintly. "I am less interested in the jacket now." Her eyes flicked toward Richard coldly. "I am more interested in how your staff is treated when cameras are not around." Richard opened his mouth desperately. "Sir, I can explain." "No," Ethan interrupted softly. "You really cannot." The restaurant remained completely silent as Ethan looked around the dining room slowly. 3 months ago, I started working undercover inside my own restaurants because I wanted to know what kind of company we had actually become. His gaze settled briefly on the kitchen staff, watching nervously from behind the swinging doors. Some people failed that test. Then his eyes moved toward Olivia. Some people reminded me why this company existed in the first place. Olivia still had not spoken. She stared at him like she no longer recognized the man standing in front of her. Ethan felt the weight of that look harder than any boardroom betrayal he had survived all year. Richard straightened suddenly, panic turning defensive now. "Sir, if this is about performance reviews, I was only trying to maintain standards." Ethan nodded once slowly. "You are right." Richard looked relieved too quickly. Carter and Oak should have standards. Ethan's expression hardened for the first time. Human decency is one of them. The silence afterward felt enormous. Ethan looked toward Daniel next. "You knew I was undercover." Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. And yet somehow this behavior continued under your supervision." Daniel lowered his eyes immediately. "I understand." Ethan nodded once. "Good." Then he turned calmly toward the entire dining room. "Richard Holloway and Daniel Mercer are no longer employed by Carter Hospitality effective immediately." Shock rippled across the restaurant. Richard looked completely stunned. "You cannot do this in front of customers." Ethan met his gaze evenly. "Watch me." 2 security employees appeared quietly near the office hallway moments later after receiving a text from Claire upstairs. Richard tried speaking again, but nobody was listening anymore. Because for the first time since Ethan walked into the restaurant disguised as a busboy, power was finally standing beside the right people. And yet somehow none of that mattered to Ethan as much as the woman still staring at him in hurt silence near the service station. Slowly, Olivia stepped toward him. "You own this place?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Ethan nodded once. "Yes." "The truck, the uniform, all of it was fake?" "Not all of it." Olivia shook her head slowly, disbelief and hurt colliding behind her eyes. "You watched us like some experiment." "Olivia, was any of it real?" That question hit harder than anything else in the room. Ethan stepped closer carefully. "Every moment with you was real." Olivia's eyes glistened slightly, but she looked away before he could read too much in them. "I do not even know who you are anymore." Ethan's voice softened instantly. "You know the part of me nobody else does." Olivia stared at him for a long moment while the restaurant remained silent around them. Then her gaze dropped briefly toward the oversized gray hoodie sleeves still covering her hands. His hoodie, the one she had never given back. When she looked up, again, her expression softened just enough to break Ethan's heart a little. "That almost makes this worse," she whispered.